Communist Party? Oh, they may have been sending some money over, but most of the money, of course, was coming from the great financiers in the United States, because we had to have an enemy to keep the conservatives, the foolish right-wingers in America, from understanding what was really going on. And then, of course, Professor Quigley tells us on page 866 what is going to happen. Regardless of the outcome of the situation, it's increasingly clear that in the 20th century, the expert will replace the industrial tycoon in control of the economic system, even as he will replace the democratic voter in control of the political system. This is because planning will inevitably replace laissez-faire in the relationship between the two systems. Hopefully, the element of choice and freedom may survive for the ordinary individual, in that he may be free to make a choice between two opposing political groups, even if these groups have little policy choice within the parameters of policy established by the experts. In other words, you can vote for whoever you want to, but it doesn't make any difference because the same policy is going to be going on. And he may have the choice to switch his economic support from one large unit to another. But in general, his freedom and choice will be controlled within very narrow alternatives by the fact that he'll be numbered from birth and followed as a number throughout his educational training, his required military or public service, his tax contributions, his health and medical requirement, and finally retirement and death benefits. Little wonder that somebody bought up Macmillan Company and destroyed the plates of this book, because the last thing they really wanted was anybody to understand what was going on in America. He talks about banking. This is page 325. This power of the Bank of England and its governors was admitted by most qualified observers. And he says in January of 1924, Reginald McKenna, who had been a Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1915-16, as chairman of the board of Midland Bank, told its stockholders, "I'm afraid the ordinary citizen will not like to be told that banks can and do create money. And they who control the credit of the nation direct the policy of the government and hold in the hollow of their hands the destiny of the people." And on page 324, he makes this statement basically about the pragmatic goals of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalistic fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. Each central bank in the hands of men like Montague Norman of the Bank of England, Benjamin Strong of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, Charles Rist of the Bank of France, Hymar Schacht of the Rice Bank, sought to dominate its government by its ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence the level of economic activity in the country, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. In other words, the best politicians that money can buy. And then, of course, he goes on to tell how these people backed Adolf Hitler, encouraged Adolf Hitler at every turn. But these are the sort of things that the public weren't supposed to understand. They were to think that Adolf Hitler just sort of came out of no place. What a fascinating book came out in 1972 called None Dare Call It Conspiracy, written by Gary Allen and Larry Abraham, pointing out that Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, the most powerful man in Russia, until one weekend when Nelson Rockefeller went over for a visit to Russia, and the following week Khrushchev was managing a power plant in Siberia someplace, a hydroelectric plant. And people began saying, well, maybe the force behind Russian communism has nothing to do with Russia. Maybe the force behind Russian communism really is in New York. 1975, this book came out, Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, pointing out, of course, that it was General Motors, General Electric, International Telephone and Telegraph, Ford Motor Company, Chase Manhattan Bank, Exxon, who built up Hitler's war machine. I have in my records a letter from Ambassador Dodd, the American ambassador to Germany during the 1930s, writing to Colonel House. Everybody was writing to Colonel House. And he was saying, why is it that American corporations are building up Hitler's war-making material capacity? I mean, we just got through with a war. Nobody wants a war. Do the American stockholders know that you can't get any money out of Germany because of the exchange controls? There's no profit to be made. Why are American corporations building up the war-making capacity of Adolf Hitler? And of course, it's very simply because we were preparing for war. Now, you can, of course, read Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Sutton going into the fact that we financed communism for its inception, national suicide going into the fact that we financed the North Vietnamese all during the Vietnam War. We were giving money to Russia, $40 billion loans to Russia so they could provide the war material to the North Vietnamese to kill our boys. But you see, the war in Vietnam really wasn't about communism. It was about distracting the American people from the fact we were becoming a socialist nation. This is when the Great Society came about, the best enemies money can buy. Let me just take you quickly back to the murder on the Orient Express, because Monsieur Perot finally decides that there are 12 suspects. There are 12 stab wounds in Mr. Ratchet. They all did it. Every one of them had a motive, and of course it was agreed upon that this very evil man was to be eliminated. And I'd like to suggest that most of the organizations we've talked about this evening are all involved in a worldwide movement to change the world, but most people have failed to recognize what the force was behind them. And so back in 1980, I went back to Georgetown University to try to figure out what was really going on. And I went through the papers of Professor Quigley to try to find out how he even knew there was a secret society, because if you read his book, you will never find out how he knew there was a secret society. And of course, I came across his letters to Professor Alfred Zimmern, and he basically had been told about the secret society by Professor Zimmern, who was part of the secret society. The following year, the book, The Anglo-American Establishment, came out, in which Professor Quigley tells us that Zimmern was part of the inner core of this secret society from 1910 to 1922, but in none of his written publications does Quigley ever reveal how he knew about the secret society. I know how he knew, because I have all of his papers and his letters to Zimmern. And of course, Professor Quigley then tells us this. He says, a wintry afternoon in February of 1981, and this comes from the Anglo-American Establishment. 3 men were engaged in earnest conversation in London, and from their conversations were to flow consequences of the greatest importance to the British Empire and to the world as a whole. For these men were organizing a secret society that was for more than 50 years to be of the utmost important, or be one of the most important forces in the formulation and execution of British imperial and foreign policy. And then, of course, he tells us in the Anglo-American Establishment that the Rhodes Scholarships established by the terms of Cecil Rhodes' 7th will are known to everyone. What is not so widely known is that Rhodes in 5 previous wills left his fortune to form a secret society which was to devote itself to the preservation and expansion of the British Empire, and what does not seem to be known to anyone as that this secret society was created by Rhodes and its principal trustee, Lord Milner, and continues to exist to this day. Well, we went to find out how we can document this. We came across a book that was written by William T. Stead. You'll have to understand that the secret society, the 4 original members were Cecil Rhodes, William Stead, Lord Milner, and a man named Brett, who later became Lord Esher, who was the senior advisor to the monarchs of England for 25 years, both the Queen Victoria and the various subsequent monarchs. And so the monarchy of Great Britain was in the hands of the secret society. Stead was eventually thrown out of the secret society, and so he was quite willing to write about it. In his diary, he discussed it, and this comes from the book, the Letters of William T. Stead by Francis White. And here he talks about, he's describing what actually happened. Stead is telling about it because he's one of the only people who ever came out of the society and was actually thrown out of it. The talk centered presently upon the secret society of the elect. Rhodes liked that word, who were to bind themselves to work for the British Empire in the way in which the Jesuits worked for the Church of Rome. And then he tells us, and let's just take the bottom paragraph here, I telegraphed for Brett, who came 2 hours later. We had a long talk, the net upshot of which the ideal arrangement would be, so far as we could see, Rhodes, the general of the society, Stead, Brett, Milner to be the hunter of 3. After Rhodes, Stead to be general, with a 3rd, possibly Rothschild in succession behind them, manning the booths, Little Johnston, Albert Gray, Arthur Balfour. Remember the name Arthur Balfour because it was a clue to what Professor Quigley missed. Now, among Professor Quigley's papers, we found Rhodes' Confession of Faith. We have the original, and it's available to any of you who would like to see it, at least the original copy that Professor Quigley had gotten from Milner, who had gotten it from the Rhodes house at Oxford. But this is what Rhodes wrote. In the present day, I become a member of the Masonic Order. I see the wealth and power they possess, the influence they hold, and I think over their ceremonies, and I wonder that a large body of men can vote themselves to what at times appears the most ridiculous and absurd rites without an object and without an end. The idea gleaming and dancing before one's eyes like a will-o'-the-wisp at last frames itself into a plan. Why should we not form a secret society with but one object, the furtherance of the British Empire for bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule?